Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. The SAARC summit is over and in an hour's time the Prime Minister will leave Kathmandu for Delhi. But with many people believing the summit has not achieved very much, we ask, has it in fact ended in failure, or would that be putting it too strongly? That's the debate in part 2. But first, the black money debate in the two houses of Parliament has produced some paradoxical results. It seems today the BJP is singing an old Congress tune, whilst the Congress has gone on the offensive and accused the BJP of making promises it can't fulfill. But beyond this, is the Finance Minister right in saying the new government has done more in 100 days than its predecessor? In part 1, we look at both these issues and analyse why the two parties seem to have switched positions and how much the new government has achieved.
हम दुनिया के कहीं भी बैंक में खाते में अगर काला धन रखा गया है उसको वापस लाएंगे और ये काला धन
And now joining me to discuss where the BJP and Congress stand on black money and how much Mr. Modi has achieved is the managing editor of the Business Standard, Rahul Jacob, the former editor of The Hindu, Siddharth Vardarajan, Congress MP and spokesperson MV Rajiv Gowda, and BJP spokesperson GVL Narasimha Rao. Rahul Jacob, let's start with the exaggerated promises made by the BJP during the election campaign, which they haven't been able to fulfill, before we come to the credible steps taken by the government in the last 6 months. First, on the 17th of April this year in Thane, Maharashtra, Rajnath Singh said all the money stashed in foreign bank accounts would be brought back within 100 days. Would you accept that he knew when he made that promise that the money would come back in 100 days, that he couldn't live up to it, therefore he was misleading and this was a false promise?
Well, election campaigns are at some level advertising campaigns, and the BJP has been lauded for running one of the greatest advertising campaigns, election campaigns as well as advertising campaigns this country's seen. So this is part and parcel of what is said at election campaigning time. But the problem here is because they've banged on about this subject over and over again with the Congress, they've now handed the Congress on a platter a weapon to hit them back with.
And the reason they've given Congress a weapon to hit them back with on a platter is because that 100 days deadline that Rajnath Singh set, he knew at the time was one he couldn't live up to, and he knew he was therefore deceiving people by making that promise.
Exactly, but they've also said they'd clean up the Ganga in 5 years and made equally astounding claims in the past. So 100 days was obviously going to be impossible, but they made it, and now they're going to be held accountable. That's their problem.
Siddharth Vardarajan, second element of deception. Whilst campaigning, Mr. Modi on one occasion said there was enough black money abroad for every Indian to receive 3 lakhs. On another occasion, he actually upped the figure and said there was enough money for every Indian to receive between 15 and 20 lakhs. But then on the 2nd of November, in his Man Ki Baat, Mr. Modi said, and I'm going to quote him, "Nobody knows, nor do I know, nor does the government know how much money is stashed abroad." In which case, does it not follow that when Mr. Modi was promising everyone 3 lakhs or 15 and 20 lakhs, he was actually knowingly misleading them because he knew he had no idea how much money there was?
Oh, absolutely. I think in defense of this, these numbers that Mr. Modi has bandied about in the campaign, today we saw on the floor of the House, Venkaiah Naidu speaking as, I suppose, Parliamentary Affairs Minister, citing the figure of, I think, 25 lakh crore, some huge figure that he said the CBI director at one time in the UPA government had publicly announced or committed, committed himself to. Now, the fact is that even that figure was a shot in the dark. Black money by definition is unaccounted money, and if it's unaccounted, you can at best make an educated guess. Chances are that you're likely to be wildly off mark. I think that Mr. Modi and the BJP, it's I suppose obvious that they would choose to make this a campaign issue, but I think in being specific about bringing the money back and also suggesting that this money would somehow, I know he was making a rhetorical point, but to suggest that recovery of black money would somehow lead to the increase in asset size of the ordinary voter, I think was was another level of deception that the BJP practiced. And, you know,
can I stop you there?
Pay for this, although
can I stop you there? In fact, he wasn't simply saying that the recovery of black money would lead to the increase in the asset size of the ordinary voter. He was very specific in how much the increase would be. First, he said 3 lakhs per person.
Exactly.
The next time, he said between 15 and 20 lakhs per person. Now, when he goes on to say that no one knows how much money there is, then is he not deliberately and knowingly misleading people by putting a specific sum that will go into everyone's pocket?
Absolutely. In fact, there is anecdotal evidence, Karan, from at least some rural areas, that the Jan Dhan Yojana, whatever enthusiasm we've seen for it, is because people assume or people are imagining that these accounts will be the accounts where this recovered black money will be put.
Okay.
So there is, you know, regard to the exigencies of campaigning, but I think that BJP and Mr. Modi went a little bit too far.
Let me bring you in at that point, Mr. Narasimha Rao. It's now established as clear fact that Rajnath Singh was misleading when he said that, in fact, money would be brought back. In fact, all the money would be brought back in 100 days. It's now established as fact that Mr. Modi was misleading when he either said everyone would get 3 lakhs or when he went on to say everyone would get between 15 and 20 lakhs. And the worst thing is, both these gentlemen knew that they were misleading. They were doing it deliberately and consciously. How do you defend them?
I would totally disagree with that proposition, Karan, because as Siddharth mentioned, there are no firmed up numbers available. So one was going by the numbers that were bandied about by different international organizations. One of such organizations that we heard of was something called Global Financial Integrity, which had estimated this, the volume of funds, the volume of money stashed abroad. And also we had a CBI director making some kind of submissions before members of parliament. So obviously, the government, the opposition at that time, the BJP, would not have any numbers to substantiate it. The statements were based on information publicly available.
Let me put this to you. That may just about amount to a very poor explanation for Mr. Modi's figures. But even there, it's not a good one because Mr. Modi's figures were first 3 lakhs per person. Then he upped it to 20 lakhs per person. So I'm not sure how these figures justify such a rate. But there's no way, there's no justification that you're giving me for Mr. Rajnath Singh's deadline of 100 days. Where did he come up with that from?
Let me offer you, you see, I think the important thing for us, for everyone to look at, is the BJP manifesto, which was released around the same time.
No, forgive me. Stick to the 100 days deadline.
The BJP would take.
Does the manifesto justify the 100 days deadline?
No, it does not mention it.
Precisely. So why did Mr. Rajnath Singh say so? He said so on the 17th of April in Thane, Maharashtra. PTI carried the story.
I know. You see, I think as a seasoned politician and having been an administrator, it's unlikely that he would not know that this would not be possible in 100 days. Possibly what he meant was initiating action in 100 days, which is what actually something similar to that is mentioned in our manifesto.
You have the right to reinterpret him. You have the right to reinterpret him to save his face. It would be slightly more honest if you'd said he'd made a mistake, but maybe you don't want to go that far. Mr. Carter, listen to what you heard as an answer first from Rahul Jacob. He said that these were campaign promises. You know, and I know, that politicians on the campaign trail make wild promises. They're prepared to offer anything as a way of securing votes. They don't really mean it. They're not going to be held accountable for its delivery. And the honest truth is, in this instance, so even if they made these exaggerated promises, so what?
Karan, the BJP deceived the people of India. Their election victory is built on a web of deceit, on lies that they sold, and they have no moral right to really continue in office. These were very specific points that they made. Now I'm taking it that far because every day you're seeing a new lie. Today, with due respect, Mr. Jaitley has said the most stupid statement I ever heard him say, where he says, when we talk about this, the account holders will get alerted. You know what? The account holders were alerted when this issue came up years ago.
Please,
so,
by the way,
basically,
just about Mr. Gowda, you're slightly jumping ahead of yourself, because that answer, if we reveal names the account holders will get alerted, was first said by your former finance minister, Pranab Mukherjee, in Parliament in 2012. Read the Indian Express front page story, you'll discover his words. So if it was stupid from Mr. Jaitley's mouth today, it was stupid from Mr. Mukherjee's mouth 2 years ago. Beware of your criticism, it can hit you back.
Okay, point taken. The point is that the moment this issue is brought up, everyone is alerted. So that's not the issue. The larger issue is the one that you brought up, which is they sold a bill of goods to through a false advertising campaign. Okay. They got every Indian, the poor man in the village, as Siddharth pointed out, opening a bank account with the hope that Mr. Modi will deliver that 15 lakhs within 100 days. You know, there is nothing more, sort of disappointing to a person than to be lied to.
You're right. That's a very fair point you're making.
It is one thing to say.
It's a very fair point you're making. Let's not take it too far. I want to move on. I don't want to get stuck on this one point. I concede you're making a very fair point. The second level, where the BJP seems to have made promises or taken positions and stands and find that it now has to contradict itself, emerges when in fact you see that in opposition, the BJP repeatedly accused the Congress of not releasing names and went on to claim that Congress was covering up. At the time, Congress said the names could not be disclosed unless a proper prosecution was filed. Today, the BJP has done a complete U-turn and actually is singing the Congress tune and saying virtually the same thing, word for word. Has the BJP suddenly dawned that reality is different to what its claims were? And is it now left with egg on its face?
Well, I think the finance minister and the previous prime minister are fond of saying politics is the art of the possible. So you come into power and suddenly you realize you have double taxation agreements, you have international agreements that you're violating if you start naming names. But if you're in opposition, to keep calling the ruling party out and saying you have to name the names, it's a nice emotional issue that gets everyone excited. It's also childish. So both have been incredibly childish in the way they have argued this point back and forth. First as ruling party in the case of Congress, and then opposition, the BJP is vindictive. Now they're getting paid back in the same coin, and serves them both right.
But is it embarrassing for the BJP that today in power it has to sing the same tune that Congress was singing just 6 months earlier?
It is. I mean, the Express story put that beautifully. They are using today, Arun Jaitley's words were prudent and we have to be careful about naming these names. This is exactly what the Congress said, and that is actually a fair, defensible point.
Siddharth Varadarajan, I want to pursue this particular point a little further by going into details. In opposition, the BJP refused to accept that the confidentiality clauses of the double taxation agreement did not permit India to disclose names unless there was a prosecutable case. Many BJP MPs, including very possibly Arun Jaitley, simply denied that position. Now, today, Mr. Jaitley is the first to say that he can't breach the confidentiality clauses, and as he adds, if he does, he will end up protecting the alleged illegal account holders. So is it not the case that even when you go under the surface into the details, you discover that the BJP is still doing U-turns and contradicting today in government what it said just 6 months ago in opposition?
Well, there are two possibilities, Karan. The first is that the BJP acted irresponsibly while in opposition, making arguments that it knew were unsustainable. And now that it's in power, it realizes that those arguments cannot hold. You had the embarrassing moment today when Mohammed Salim was quoting CPM MP, quoted what Ravi Shankar Prasad, senior minister, lawyer, had said in Parliament against Pranab Mukherjee's argument. So this is all now part of the record. The other theory is that the logic of both the UPA and the NDA is flawed, is wrong. In other words, you have senior lawyers, you have Ram Jethmalani, you have the Supreme Court itself, which knows that over the last 60 years, India's treaty obligations do take precedence over domestic law. Despite that, you have the Supreme Court insisting that there is no problem in revealing names. So I think this is an issue. Perhaps there is collusion at some level. Both the NDA and the UPA want to shield certain names, or don't want to get, they want to exploit this issue for propaganda but not really go to the heart of the matter, because political funding comes from black money. It's a well-known fact.
Let me stop you there.
I'll
just put in a small correction. The Supreme Court's final position on whether in fact those confidentiality clauses can be breached or not is now something they've deferred to the SIT. They've given the government permission to make their case to the SIT, and they're waiting for the SIT to come back. So there is a certain change in the Supreme Court's position from its original enunciation. But I'm coming back to you, Mr. Narasimha Rao. Once again, we have a situation where very learned people, top lawyers like Arun Jaitley, who should have known better, find that on this confidentiality clause business and on this claim that names can be disclosed, they're doing complete U-turns. They're contradicting the stand they took in opposition today when they're in government. And once again, isn't it embarrassing?
No, it is not. You see, let me tell you why. The Congress party in government, for 3 years, they dodged. They did not form an SIT, although the
we'll come to the SIT later. Mr. Narasimha Rao, I'll come to the SIT in a moment's time. I'm talking now about the position taken on confidentiality clauses and disclosure of names. Answer that. We'll come to SIT in a moment's time. Let's go one by one.
Let me draw your attention to the German government, which was wanting to give the names of the Liechtenstein Bank without any confidentiality clause.
Forgive me.
Congress government actually went to them, insisted that we want the confidentiality clause to be applied.
You're contradicting a very important point made by Arun Jaitley in the Rajya Sabha yesterday, so be careful. Arun Jaitley said that after the Liechtenstein names were disclosed, the German government wrote in anger to protest. So far from wanting to disclose it themselves, they were upset when the names got disclosed. So please don't contradict yourself, and you're embarrassing your own party when you do.
No, at that time they were willing to give without the confidentiality clause. That's the information I have.
Yeah,
but this government insisted on getting this information
just
under
a moment,
confidentiality clause, and now when the names are disclosed,
we owe it to the country that we don't peddle wrong information. At the moment, the information you're giving me is wrong, or it is for sure at least unverified. So let's leave it there. Mr. Gowda, let me bring you in. There's no doubt that the BJP, by changing its stance on disclosing names, has embarrassed itself. I grant you that. No one would deny it for a moment. But how long do you intend to continue to rub the BJP's nose in this mess? You did it successfully in the Rajya Sabha yesterday. You've done it in the Lok Sabha today. But you can't carry on and on and on.
Karan, they will give us opportunities. Look at Mr. Jaitley. At one level, you know, if you say this was election rhetoric and they were just pulling a fast one on the people of India, that's over. Well, look at what Mr. Jaitley did a few days ago. He, the same person who says, oh, we've got to worry about all these agreements, etc., on TV with Barkadat says, oh, and Congress will be embarrassed. Why? Who is bringing politics into this? Who is trying to make political capital? Who is trying to mislead the people of India? It is the BJP, it is Mr. Jaitley. These same learned lawyers, Mr. Jaitley and Ravi Shankar Prasad, who had previously been in government, who know and whose government had signed double taxation agreements with confidentiality clauses, chose to mislead the people of India in parliament and outside. They chose to throw these big numbers and mislead the people, and now they again are making mischievous statements. They have we have every right to expose them continuously until they stand naked in front of the people.
I can't deny that. You have every right, because at this moment it must in addition be a pleasure to do so as well. Let's now flip the discussion, Rahul Jacob. We've talked about the exaggerated promises the BJP made in opposition, which they now find are embarrassing them because they can't deliver. Let's flip and come to what I call the credible steps the government has taken in the last 6 months. Firstly, almost on its first proper day in office, the Modi government set up the SIT. In contrast, since July 2011, when the Supreme Court first ordered it, Congress was dragging its feet. They filed at least one, maybe even two petitions in the Supreme Court to get the Supreme Court to withdraw its order. Would you accept the SIT was a credible step taken by...
So, but they do deserve credit for moving quite fast on that.
And in contrast to Congress, who were in fact dragging their feet for 3 years.
Well, Congress claimed they took it up at the G20 and they had reasons to
But they weren't doing what the Supreme Court had ordered.
Yeah, absolutely true.
Mr. Gowda, I accept that Congress was reluctant to set up the SIT on the grounds that you felt the Supreme Court was exceeding its authority and trespassing over the domain of the executive. The country, however, saw the matter very differently. The country applauded the BJP for setting up the SIT with such alacrity, and they felt that you, in dragging your feet, were creating an excuse about this division of powers matter, but really you were trying to protect people in the process. You got the wrong end of it, and the BJP scored points over you.
Not at all, Karan. If you actually look at what the government did, they actually went after the names that they already had in their possession. There were enforcement actions and investigations. Names were, if you recall, some of the names that have been revealed had been revealed earlier, and there was proceedings against them. That is the job of the executive, not necessarily that of the Supreme Court. And so the Congress government, the UPA, was taking action. That is the proof of the pudding.
Okay.
Here, the BJP...
There's not too much of a pudding to eat here, so whether you think there's any proof in what little you've given us to eat, I don't know, but never mind. We're getting lost in metaphors. Siddharth Varatharajan, let me come to a second critical step taken by this government. The agreement they secured with the Swiss government in October that Switzerland will cooperate even when the information is allegedly stolen, provided India has some evidence of its own to back it up. And secondly, that within a time-bound framework, Switzerland will confirm the veracity of documents. Would you accept that these are two significant understandings to have secured from a country like Switzerland?
Absolutely. I think Mr. Jaitley was very convincing today in the Lok Sabha when he explained the steps that the Modi government took to negotiate this with Switzerland. What he was not convincing about, however, was the answer to Bhartrihari Mahatab of the BJD, who said that there are a number of account holders who were found to be to have dodged their taxes, and they settled their tax dispute, and at least their name should be made public, because surely that's not in contravention of any international confidentiality. And Mr. Jaitley kind of fudged that question.
Okay.
I think that there is reasonable apprehension that powerful people caught up in this dragnet will not be identified. And I think that it's essential that there be the utmost transparency, and that the Supreme Court monitor this entire process from start to finish.
Not that I'm speaking on Mr. Jaitley's behalf for a moment, but one reason why even after people have settled their tax cases, you can't disclose their names is because there was no prosecution brought in court. I do believe that the DTAA confidentiality clause requires specific prosecution for disclosure of name. If you've settled amicably and there's no prosecution, I think that may preclude the disclosure of the name. But I'm not answering on Mr. Jaitley's behalf. He'd need to clarify that himself. Very quickly, I want to come to you, Mr. Narasimha Rao.
This is what he said in... Okay.
I want to put this to Mr. Narasimha Rao. Mr. Chidambaram, in the interview he gave NDTV in October, made it clear that the process of negotiating with Switzerland to achieve those two results, as well as much of the understanding with Switzerland that led to those two results, actually happened under UPA. It's just that the culmination or the outcome happened in Mr. Jaitley's time. You can't therefore deny that a substantial element of the credit actually goes to the UPA. They did the hard work, you got the prize.
I think that's what they claim. I think, in fact, we have inherited an economy in shambles thanks to them. But in this particular case, I think the Supreme Court was breathing down their neck for several years, and they had to initiate some proceedings. But they did not really conclude any of those. And our government, we have actually done this we have put this on the fast track mode. And by March this year, coming year, which is hardly 3-4 months away, we have promised that we will investigate all and prosecute people who have actually evaded taxes. So there is, look at the time frame that NDA has and the time frame that UPA had. And possibly this had a link to their UPA scam money.
Well, let's not expand this into unjustified insinuations that neither you nor I can prove. Let's just keep it to the facts as we know them. Now, Rahul Jacob, in his speech yesterday in the Rajya Sabha, Mr. Jaitley said the NDA government had done more in 100 days than its predecessor. He then proceeded to reveal that of the 627 HSBC names, 427 accounts had been traced. 250 of those, presumably, have admitted to owning these accounts. And there have already been a handful of prosecutions, 3 that we know about, and a few more that he hasn't given details of. Would you accept that in a 6-month period, that's a decent amount of work by this government?
Well, they've made some progress, but again, they're not giving the UPA credit for the back and forth that went with Switzerland before that. and they're taking undue credit for having come rather incrementally to this point. But there's a larger point here. There are only 3% of Indians who pay tax anyway. So the black money isn't all stashed abroad. A lot of it is probably in this capital and not that difficult to find. And I think the debate has to get beyond that and not just this kind of witch hunt of naming names, shaming people, all the rest of it. It's, are you going to go forward with the GST? Are you going to broaden the tax net? And at the moment, the relationship between the two parties is so poisoned, it's hard to see how they take the reforms forward.
Siddharth Varadarajan, Cobra Post today revealed a sting operation that they've done where some 20 or 30 CEOs in the property business have been exposed as people willing to whitewash black money and convert it into white. Do you believe that, in fact, if the BJP is serious, I don't want to go into the details of the Cobra posting, but if the BJP is serious, they need to tackle the internal generation of black money, because that is by far the bigger and greater element of it. A quick answer.
Absolutely. You know, what Rahul said is absolutely correct. You have internal processes linked to the property market, linked to politics, where black money is generated on an unprecedented scale. And unless those channels are shut down with decisive rules, decisive laws, enforcement of the law, you know, you can always be chasing accounts here and there. Just one point of information, the reason I said Jaitley's argument was weak is because the HSBC accounts did not come to you through any double taxation agreement. So that information came to the government. On the basis of that, they launched tax inquiries.
Well, no, hang on a second. The HSBC names were given to the government by the French. The French got it from a whistleblower, but they then broke it up into the different countries it concerned, and they gave the names to India. Mr. Jaitley said so specifically in the Rajya Sabha.
But they were purloined. They were purloined documents.
But after that, if you want further information to back up any possible prosecution you have to get that information through the DTAA, which is why if you start disclosing details, that information will drive. That's the point.
They had,
but let's not
enough information in that diskette. Okay.
I'm not sure they did. If they did, they would have proceeded. I'm not sure they did, but you may be right. Let me, Mr. Gowda, put to you very quickly in the limited time available a point Mr. Jaitley made. He said black money was too important a national issue to be lowered into or transformed into an NDA versus UPA debate or just an extension of an election campaign. It needs to be treated without polemics. How do you respond to that?
I would say that this is the height of hypocrisy. Mr. Jaitley is again continuing to play politics and pull a fast one. Let us talk about what all the UPA has done, even to tackle black money within India. Look at the steps, whether it is tax reduction at source, where value-added taxation, which creates incentives for revealing taxes. What else? Mr. Chidambaram was famous for extending the tax net. In all kinds of innovative ways. We've been working to increase the tax to GDP ratio. We've been working to ensure that there is more transparency built up into the system. So there is no question of NDA versus UPA. The UPA has been working towards this. These are very, very challenging endeavors. In fact, if you want to ask Mr. Jaitley, where did the $1 billion to fund Mr. Modi's
just a moment, Mr. Naswal. Sorry, Mr. Gowda. Let's keep